Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me clearly? Yes, great. Thank you. My name is Leo Can Polidor. I will be your host during this webinar with WeSee. We are very happy to have you here this morning in New Caledonia and for others in the evening or if in the afternoon, depending where you are. We're very happy to have you today. It hasn't been easy organizing this webinar, especially in light of the recent situation. I will talk about that briefly. We've been knowing a difficult situation at the moment on the territory, but with WeSee and the whole team in charge of Database Challenge, we really wanted to organize that webinar since we think that it can inspire you and maybe gives you a breath of fresh air throughout those difficulties. We also think that database can create a better world throughout crisis, and the latest was the COVID crisis, of course. You would have seen that map showing the spread of the virus and the increase of cases every day in different countries. Those maps have been used by politics to make important decisions. That is why database, that is data visualization, can help educate, inform, and even enlighten through the availability of the information, transforming complex information in a very simple visualization that gives you a key message in just one snapshot. So thank you all for being so many of you in this webinar. We have 5 data stars with us today that I've already introduced, but I'll let them introduce themselves quickly. Don't forget to choose your language for this webinar. A few practical information in terms of organization. Throughout the webinar, we've got 2 hours. You'll be able to ask questions, and we encourage you to ask questions. There are no stupid questions. That's very important to remember. To remember, if you think your question is stupid, I'm sure somebody will find it useful. Our objective through this webinar is to allow you to learn a little bit more about data visualization, and of course, encourage you to take part in this Database Challenge 2024, because this webinar is organized through that challenge. Without further ado, I will go through the rest of this introduction. I hope everybody's ready. I encourage you to participate and ask for questions. You can ask your question in the chat box, or you can ask the question verbally, preferably after raising your hand on the platform. I hope this is clear for everyone, and let's go into the presentation. So we're not going to change a good team. So I have the pleasure once again to present my colleague, Wisi Tao, who works with the government. This is the 3rd edition of this Database Challenge. We are starting to really like it, cherish it. Sometimes it's a bit complicated, but it's still always a pleasure to organize that challenge every year. WCTIO is in charge of data with the government. So this is a collaboration with the community, the Pacific community and the New Caledonia government. And it's been 3 years. We'll be your hosts through this webinar. So do not hesitate to ask us if you have any problem with sound or anything. Regarding our speakers, we've got 4 speakers, 4 women and 1 man. Ali Torben, coming from the US. Get Greenbook from New Zealand. I hope I'm not mispronouncing your names. Selena Fisk is coming from Australia. Craig Taylor from UK. And Mel Foucounet from France. So for these last 2 speakers, it should be around 11:30 in the evening. So I hope they have had their shot of coffee. Thank you all for being here, despite the sometimes complicated schedule, which is the joy of organizing a webinar with people from around the world. Before we start and we do presentation, I'd like to play a little game with you. I know you start knowing me by now. This game is to know you a little bit better, know our audience, know who you are, who are the different participants here online with us. So you just have to use that QR code Otherwise, the Slido link has been added to the chat box by WeSee, and you can also use the QR code on the screen. So there will be two quick questions. I will share my Slido screen with you. It's loading, it's coming.
Parfait, merci WeSee.
Thank you, WeSee. So I've launched the Slido. You should be able to connect. So you have two ways to do that. You can use the QR code, which is the easiest to answer the questions with your mobile phone, or you can connect to slido.com, indicating that code hash 1296663. The first question is, where do you come from? So I want to know where you're coming from. I always find it interesting to know where the people come from in the audience. So that's great. We've got people from France, from New Caledonia, of course, New Zealand, Tuvalu, that's fantastic, from Fiji, Wallis and Futuna. Very happy to see all the colleagues from Pacific. We've got colleagues from the UK. New Zealand is well represented. We've got colleagues from Kiribati, from Tonga. I'm hoping to be able to go back to Tonga quickly. I've been there in December. Maybe my colleagues from the statistics office in Tonga. We've got New York also, Matautu, Rotuma, Uganda. So we have a real global audience, a lot of people from the Pacific, Nantes in France. Fantastic. So already 51 people have replied, of course, a wide share from New Caledonia. So I hope this webinar will give you a breath of fresh air and think about something that is a bit more light and joyful than the current situation. Okay, next question. It's a very simple question. I just want to know, what is your level, your knowledge, your level of knowledge in terms of data visualization? Do you feel at ease? Do you feel like you're more of a beginner? So one is a beginner. You're here because you're curious. You want to know what it's all about. And level 5 being an expert. You work regularly on data visualization. You use that every day in your line of work. Just to have an idea, again, of the audience that will help our different speakers, because it's always interesting to know whether we have most beginners or experts. And of course, the speakers will do as best as they can to explain in layman terms. And I'm sure they will manage that successfully. So we have almost 45% of beginners. Otherwise, we've got a quarter of at level 3, neutral level, which is good to have a wide share of beginners, because the idea is also to give you keys to maybe go a bit more in depth in data visualization. And as for experts at level 4 and 5, you'll see that there are also little tricks that will allow you to go a little bit more in depth. Great. So I'm going to remove the Slido now and go back to my presentation and share the essential info on Database Challenge 2024.
Un petit décalage, excusez-moi.
Sorry for the little bit.
Voilà. Est-ce que vous voyez toujours mon écran? Oui, si.
Okay, can you still see my screen? Yes, great. So, Pacific Database Challenge 2024. What is it? What are the key elements to keep in mind? Don't worry, I'm not gonna go not gonna be too long. Just to give you a few key information, this challenge I started on the 1st of May, and you have until the 30th of June 2024 to submit to this challenge, this contest. Who can take part? Anyone, even underage. The idea that if you have a cousin, a little cousin, somebody that you know that could take part in this challenge, don't hesitate to encourage them to participate. You can participate individually or as a team. We speak of a team because sometimes it can be interesting to mix up different talents. There can be somebody very good in coding, somebody a bit more on the design area, or somebody more as a storyteller. So you can build your own dream team for this Pacific Database Challenge. And concretely, what do you have to do? Well, you have to create an original database. But the most interesting is what you can earn, what you can win. Well, this year we've been able to increase the price envelope. There's a total of 15,000 US dollars to win. We have two categories. The first category, interactive data viz, which is a more dashboard applications, websites. Under this category, you have three prizes. The first prize is $3,000, the second is $2,000, and the third prize is $1,000. And we're talking of US dollars. And we have a second category, the static database. So we're talking here of posters, PDF reports. So you're gonna use Canva or Photoshop, these kind of tools. The idea being to encourage also a category of population which is more at ease using graphists or illustrators tools. So for this category, you also have three prizes, $3,000, $2,000, and $1,000. And this year, um, a bit of an exceptional category, which I hope we'll be able to reproduce. We want to encourage youth and Pacific participation, especially. That's why we have created two special prizes. The first one is $1,500 for youth competitors under 26 years of age, and a second prize for people from the Pacific region, also 1,500 US dollars to encourage just two groups. So you can participate 4 times. You can take part in the two individual categories and also as a team. And you can also be a youth or coming from the Pacific. Who are the judges? I'm not going to be too long because, as you can see, 4 of our judges are today's speakers. So we're very happy to have them also as judges. Thank you for accepting. Selena Fisk was not available to take part as a judge. So she's been replaced by Kingui Lee, who was one of the winners of last year. And I hope I didn't mispronounce her name either. She won the second prize in the interactive database category. She takes part in many contests throughout the world, and that's very interesting to see former participants becoming judges. The 4 criteria that will be assessed against are storytelling, design, innovation, and technical skills.
Qu'est-ce que vous pouvez utiliser en tant qu'outil? Tout.
What tools can you use? Any tools, any tool that is available. The slogan of the team is that there is no limit. You can use any tool that is available, that is working for you. This is a non-exhaustive list of tools that are working. The most known, of course, are Tableau, Locker from Google, Power BI, but all the programming languages can be used also, as well as software, image creating softwares, Photoshop, Canva, etc., etc. The idea here is to tell you that you can use any tool you want to use. It was also important for us to show the theme of this year. Last year, the theme was food. So we had themes related to food security or climate change. This year, we have a theme which is very inspiring and interesting on gender inequality. Why this subject? Well, it's a very important subject in the Pacific, but in the rest of the world also. And it's interesting also because it's quite topical and related to many problems. We can talk of inequalities in terms of wage, in terms of daily life. I think there's a subject, there's a lot to do, a lot to learn. And this is why we've shared many data sets on our websites that you can find there. Another important element before I conclude, you have to use at least one data set from those websites. This is the only rule that will not be negotiable. So you can use a data set from the Pacific Data Hub, the Pacific Community Data Hub, or from datagov.nc, which is the New Caledonia Government Data Hub. They are both available on our own website. If you have questions, there are quite a few information on our website, but if you have any more questions, you can use the form to contact us through the website, and you can use any of those data sets you wish to work on. So how do you participate? It's very easy. You just have to submit your data visualization through the button that is now on the website, on the portal. What is the timeline, the calendar, and what has already happened? So we've had to cancel the presentation to students in University of New Caledonia, but we can see that the webinar has been maintained. And a little reminder, submissions have to be submitted by June 30th, 11 p.m. GMT plus 11, and the prize ceremony will be on the 12th of July. And without further ado, what is more interesting, I'm going to stop chattering now, and I'm going to give the floor to Selena Fisk. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, Selena. And I give you the floor. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the meeting.
Thank you, Leo. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be here with the other DataViz stars. Some of my heroes are in the room today, so that's pretty exciting. I just wanted to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking through, I guess, the process that I go through when I'm deciding on what visualizations to choose. Because at the end of the day, whichever one of those tools that you use or you choose that Leo suggested, you need to craft and create a compelling visualization so that you can convey your master message to your audience. So when I'm doing this, whenever I have a problem and I'm trying to develop a dashboard, I always design the dashboard first on a piece of paper with a pen. And I'm deliberately not going to use any slides today in this little 10 minutes, which is a little bit ironic that we're in a DataViz webinar. But actually putting pen on paper is the best way to, sorry, I'm just trying to change my settings because it's defaulted to French. Putting pen on paper is actually a really good way to plan your data viz. So I often pick up a piece of paper and a pen and I start to kind of scribble ideas that I have. The first thing that I do is when I look at a data set, I think about, well, what's the master message for me that I'm trying to convey in this particular data visualization? So whether that be a dashboard or an infographic, wherever you're kind of designing it and how you're designing it. The reason why the master message has to motivate the visualization decisions is because there are some visualizations that are better to convey some messages than others. And so when we're really clear on what we're trying to share with the user, then we can be a bit more deliberate about the visualizations that we choose. And I work as a data storyteller, and I often work in a really interesting space in between the people who create dashboards and write reports. So between the analysts and the other people in the organization who are the people who consume that information and who use the dashboards. And the problems that I often hear in that gap is that analysts and the people designing the visualizations don't truly understand the problem or the challenge, and therefore what they create for the rest of the organization or what they create for the audience misses the mark a little bit. And so often we actually just need to get those people together and have a conversation. We can't do that, but the principles are still the same. We've got to think about what's that key master message that we're trying to convey, and how do we choose those really good visualizations to do that in the best possible way. So for example, if you wanted to highlight the gap in something or the gap in a particular data set, we've got lots of different visualization options available. So that one that I showed you there, a waterfall chart, is one way that you might choose to show the gap in particular metrics. You could equally draw a lollipop chart. So lollipop charts show before and after, and it's a different conversation about the change in two metrics, rather than saying, or rather than having, say, two bars in a bar chart side by side and forcing the user to do that comparison in their head. If you want them to know about the gap or the difference, choosing a visualization like that might actually be the best way forward. Obviously, we might want to be conveying or telling a story about what's been happening over time. So longitudinal line graphs are a really good way to do that. And it's important that we think, is there any additional context that we need to put into that visualization that would help? So do I need a trend line, like a global trend line in this case? Do I want to compare what's happening in my particular country to other countries in the region? What we've got to do is there are so many decisions that you're going to need to make in the development of this visualization. You've got to think about what's the most important, because more is not better. We've actually got to do a better job with fewer visualizations to really get across the line. Sometimes we want to compare different categories, and a default that I've seen has been bar charts with lots and lots of different bars. And I saw one earlier this week where the person had created a bar chart and there was about 50 different bars, and they were all really skinny and they were all different colors. And the user had to think about, there was an orange bar here, an orange bar here, an orange bar, and we were trying to track across the different categories. And that's just not the best way to choose to represent that type of data. You're really trying to drop the cognitive load of the user and share the message in the best way possible. So if you want to talk about how that particular category has performed over time or what's happened, it's best to group that and show that in a way that actually means the user can really quickly kind of ascertain what that message is. Sometimes we want to talk about the spread of something. So not just an average score, a median score, the maximum or the minimum values. But if we want to look at the spread of something, the best, I reckon, in many cases, the best way to do that is in a box plot. So box plots group our data in 25% categories, and they're a really good way of showing the spread. And they also allow a comparison maybe to a different region in the world or to different countries, but it can be a useful way of doing it. If we want to think about creating elements of a whole, now, I don't know what the other data viz stars on this webinar think about pie charts. I don't mind them if there's a maximum of 4 things in the pie. People don't love them, but just a pie chart can be useful. But if we use them, we have to make sure that we're not putting in too many categories. Otherwise, it becomes really, really hard to work out what's bigger, what's more important, where it starts, and how significant the size of those different things are. But if we're trying to represent the components of a whole and there's less than 4, that might be the way to do it. But more often than not, what we see is stacked bar charts for components of a whole. So things like, just drawing these as I'm going, so stacked bar charts. Usually that's better done as a percentage. So we can see percentage of whole rather than having a look at some of the raw data. Again, the raw data, if it changes across different categories, it makes it a little bit harder to interpret, but sometimes percentage stacked bar charts allow us to make that comparison as the user a little bit more quickly and a little bit more easily. So As I said, it's really important that we choose the right visuals. Visualizations and different images are not created equally. And as the developer and creator, we've got to think about what do we want our audience to know, and what's the best possible way of sharing that information with them so that they can start to identify those trends really quickly. And so they're not having to do a lot of the heavy lifting with the thinking about doing things like looking at orange bars all the way across a really spread out visual. Couple of last little points that I would add in terms of creating your data viz is to think about not just adding more for the sake of it. So be very deliberate about the handful of visualizations that you use. Be very discerning in that decision-making process, and use color well. So the defaults that you'll have in Power BI, Tableau, Google Looker, like any of those platforms, whatever you're creating it in, the defaults are not necessarily best practice. So have a think about how can you use color to really highlight a gap or a particular trend line or a particular bar. Think outside the box when it comes to the color and don't just run with the default. The final thing I'm going to leave you with today is to think about the way we often look at a dashboard or a report or a data visualization is like books. We read top to bottom and left to right. So your key visualizations need to be towards the top and the left of your data viz. So think about it in the same way that people read. So the idea would be to prioritize the best visuals and the most important messages and put them at the top on the left, and then think about as they become less important or less urgent, they kind of go further down the data visualization. But I might pause there, Husi, and just try and keep to time. But if there's any questions, I'm really happy to answer them. Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup, Selena, pour cette présentation. C'est vrai que c'était assez original avec les...
Thanks, Selena. Very original presentation using post-its, notes. If you have any questions, we can ask questions now because Selena's got a plane to catch. That's why we asked to speak first. But if you have any questions, do not hesitate. Raise your hand in Zoom or ask your questions in the chat. So we've got a first question. Can you see that question in the chat?
Yes, I can. So colors, it's a good question because we don't want to use too many. I tend to use 3 to 4 colors if I can. Sometimes it pushes to 5, but I keep it very similar. And I make sure as well that for example, if I'm using a blue, a green, and a yellow, that I'm using the same blue, the exact same blue color in every visualization. I'm using the same green and I'm using the same yellow because we're trying to make it as easy as possible to interpret for the user. We don't want to be using different shades, ideally. We want consistency.
Merci pour cette première question. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions?
Thanks for this first question. Are there any other questions in the chat, or you can ask your question in person as well?
Yeah, there's another one there about the images. I think they're really important. You think about infographics and the ways that we can also visualize information. If you wanted to say like 4 in 5 women, for example, you could represent that as a percentage, like a fuel gauge. But equally, you could have 5 icons and you could have 4 of them colored in. And so it's just a different way of using kind of imagery and icons in your visualizations to convey the same kind of meaning. So that's a really good question.
Selena, vous avez beaucoup de fans concernant votre présentation. Avec
A
les
lot of
post-it.
people think that the idea of using post-it notes was absolutely great.
No
Are there
worries at all.
any other questions to Selena? No, no more questions. One last question. If there are no more questions, we're going to move on. Thank you very much, Selena, for taking part in this webinar. I know you won't be able to be with us until the end. Have a nice trip. I hope you'll be able to catch your plane. Oh, just one last thing. Antoine is asking a question in the chat.
It's in French. But avez-vous un exemple de cas?
He's asking whether you've got an example of a data viz you created and where you made a mistake in terms of colors.
Good question. I've learnt a lot over the last 15 years that I've been doing this work, so those examples would probably be quite old. I think if anything, it's probably less about the colors, but I made them too busy. So too many different visualizations, too busy. And I'm sure you all know Brent Dykes is a data storyteller, and he's done some really good LinkedIn posts recently about removing some of the noise from visualizations. So removing grid lines if you don't need them, just highlighting maybe the one bar that you're trying to show in the color you want, and then making everything else gray and really cutting down the extra noise. So yeah, I'm definitely getting better at that over time. We're all still learning, right? And we're all still evolving. But yeah, that's one way to think about it. Remove some of the noise. And the question about AI and ChatGPT to evaluate how easy the data viz is to understand. So in terms of particularly accessibility, I'm also use tools about accessibility to make sure that the color contrasts are right, to make sure that it's readable and accessible. And obviously, I work with a lot of people who are colorblind, for example, and there are particular color palettes that we can choose for people who are colorblind. That means that they can see the differences more obviously than if we were to use the historical, kind of just traffic light, red, yellow, and green. So I look at it more from an accessibility perspective when I consider it. I think the colors, I don't have a hard and fast rule about what colors to choose, but it's about choosing the ones that work for you. So it could be that you choose the colors of the country that you're based in. It could just be that you're choosing a handful of colors that you really like. I've worked with people who've changed the traditional red, yellow, green into pastel, purple, pink, and yellows, and that works as well. But it's more important that you're consistent. The choice of color is less important. Consistency is the most important thing throughout your data viz.
Merci Selena d'avoir répondu à ces différentes questions.
Thank
Dr.
you, Selena, for answering these questions. And thank you for your questions, Adrien, Jubilee. Thanks to all these questions. It's great because that's the very purpose of this webinar, for us to be able to ask questions and to answer questions. I'll have to stop here, unfortunately, because we need more time for the other presenters. Let me just add something about colors. Thank you, Selena. I've posted a tool that could be used to use different colors or colors of the same type. Something else about colors. Some people can be colorblind. These people find it very difficult to make a difference to distinguish between red and green. And these people make up 8% of the male population. That's quite something. So this is something you should take into account in your database. I'll add in the chat a link to a tool that can help you communicate with people who suffer from color blindness. We are going to move to the following presentation by Maël Fouquenet, who will tell us about gendered statistics and why it is so important. Maël, you have the floor. Thank you. Can you hear me? And can you see my screen? Yes. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. Considering your situation, I was wondering what would happen with the webinar. I hope that things will come to a positive end for everybody. My name is Maëlle Poucnet. I'm an open data consultant for data activist. I'm an expert on gender issues and on algorithmic transparency. I used to be a journalist, so I worked a lot on data journalism. So I'm very familiar with everything related to data and with storytelling. Today, I'm going to tell you how gender data can help improve public policies and the life of half the population, besides the male population, because you've got just about as many men and as women on the earth. So that's why I've decided to focus on the issue of gender. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about three main points. First of all, sex, then missing data, and about what's beyond data. These are the main points of my presentation. We can have talk more fully later if you ask me questions. First of all, let's talk about sex and about sex and gender. Let's try to make a distinction between sex and gender. Gender data relate to raw data that are presented in a disaggregated manner and that could be quantitative or qualitative. Very often, these data are disaggregated by sex or gender. What's the difference? Sex is a biological condition assigned at birth, and gender is a social and cultural construction of each and every one of us. This is something I want to state right at the beginning of my presentation so that you understand what I'm talking about later. The objective here is to leave no one behind. And this can translate very easily in school, at school in France. We realize now that in French schools, outside of French schools, or in the courtyard, you've got always a lot of football grounds. And so some people decided to organize things differently. So this type of data can be used to develop public policies, to focus on specific issues that can be helpful to focus investments in a certain manner. So when it comes to these to schools, in many schools, they try to find activities that will include both girls and boys, not having 80% of boys playing football. Purpose for this is for all the kids to play together, girls and boys. Other tools, gendered budgeting. What is it all about? It's about analyzing expenses and incoming money to see what is being used for whom. This is something that has been promoted by the OECD since 2016. The purpose of all this is for money to be spent for everyone. This is something that's only been introduced in France quite recently. Nantes, Strasbourg, Lyon, if I'm not mistaken, have been working on this for the last 2 or 3 years only. So it's very recent in France. And the first outcome of all this in Strasbourg is that they decided to look at the amount of money spent in the sports department. And they realized that 80% of those benefiting from this money, this spending, were men. So the idea was to try to find another way of using the budget, a more balanced way between men and women. I could give you many more examples through the chat if you like. The second point I wanted to talk about was missing data, because to do all this, you need data, obviously. And in a lot of areas, we don't have the data. Why? Well, because nobody thought about collecting the data. I've already heard that say, oh, I was wondering why such data was not available. No, I was told, no, we didn't think about it. It's also because sometimes it's too complicated. It's the famous hormone excuse. So things are getting better in that respect, but it's still a problem. Then also the data is not collected because people don't want to do it or because it's too expensive. Here I've got some puppets used for crash tests. And there's a new obligation for car manufacturers to use female-bodied puppets to do these crash tests. I don't know why, because I drive my car in the US. 61% of those people who purchase a car are women. So you would expect them to conduct these crash tests on women as well. So here again, an example of missing data. Sometimes the data is there, but it's not being analyzed. A review was conducted in 2020 about drug trials and the impact on women, and they realized that in 72% of these cases, gender was not taken into account. Sometimes the data is collected, disaggregated, analyzed, but nothing is done with this data, or they are misused. For example, the algorithm used to prioritize liver transplants in the US called MELD. This algorithm was created in 2002, and in 2008, they realized that women came last or came after men when it comes to rating them for liver transplant for all sorts of reasons. So they found that out in 2008, but the algorithm was only modified in 2020 or 2022. I don't know why it took so long to react and correct the algorithm. There is an explanation to all this that's quite striking, and it's not related to just data or things like that. Simone de Beauvoir, in her book, The Second Sex, said that representation of the world, like the world itself, is the work of men, and that they confuse it with absolute truth. I think there's a lot to say for this, for what she said there. And the thing is, if you don't have any data, then you don't have any problems. This is a feminist organization from Australia that has created this poster. And in France, we've only started talking about the murder of women by their partners when an organization started counting the number of such occurrences. So it's only then that the authorities decided to do something about it. So this is what I wanted to say about missing data. Last thing, beyond data, you've got artificial intelligence. For example, in 2014 and 2015, Amazon used a tool that pushed women away from any type of development position. So only men were selected when it comes to hiring people at Amazon inside some positions. There's also a study that was done by Joy Boilan-Mimi. I encourage you to listen to his TED Talks. It's really interesting. There's a problem when it comes to facial recognition, especially for women and colored faces and older women. Same problem with voice recognition. So here in the United States, sometimes some of these facial recognition tools refuse to recognize the candidates based on their face. And the same problem happens with the voice recognition because there aren't enough women included or voices included in the data sets. So it could be that in the next few years, in a few years' time, maybe I won't be able to talk to my car because my car won't recognize my voice. One last example. Beyond data, you've got all the training database used for AI that reproduce or reuse stereotypes. And I'm going to stop, but I just want to stress the following point. We need more gendered data, but these data are used to train algorithm. It has a real impact on our lives. So we need to question current practices, methods, what type of data is being used, what type of algorithm is being used, and we need more women. We need more women involved in science, computing, database, because if we are not there to talk about this, we won't be taken into account. And it's not just a matter of women. It's not just for women to take responsibility. Lauren Klein has said it very clearly. It's a collective responsibility. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maëlle, for this very inspiring presentation. We'd like to give you 30 minutes, but we don't have enough time, unfortunately. It's fascinating. I have many questions, but I leave the floor to people on the call. For those of you who want to ask your question, not in the chat, but in person, you'll find 3 small dots more at the bottom of your screen. And then once you you click on that, you can ask your question directly. So we have a first question from Antoine. Do you have any advice to improve the collection and the processing of gender data? Well, the first thing is to ask the question, do I have that data? Can I use this data? Is it good quality data, up to date? The second advice is to ask the question of the people who are involved or the communities that are concerned by this. I'm talking about gender, but it's not just about gender. Working with the people that are directly interested and involved by this data or concerned by this data will help you collect data that is much more relevant and much more useful. So this is the main advice I would give. When it comes to data related to the murder of women by their partners, somebody's asking in the chat whether there are open data, there's open data available about this issue. Not in France at the moment. It's really tricky to get that information. AFP, Libération, and other media have created their own database, or by going through that type of crime record. But I don't think we have this is available in open data, not in France at least. Somebody's asking why this is complicated, why this is tricky. Well, because it's tricky because not everybody agrees on the meaning of this word, the féminicide in French, the murder by your partner. The police will take into account women who've been killed by their partner or ex-partner. Organizations or CSOs will also take into account somebody killed by their cousin, by the family member, and others will believe that it's also about women being killed by anybody else. So it's all a matter of definition. And women's association also take into account the murder of trans people, and that's not the case of the police. Thank you, Maëlle. I've got a question myself. At the beginning of your presentation, you said you had a number of examples you couldn't give us because you didn't have time. Would you be able to give us some examples? But what exactly are you thinking about? Yes, earlier you told about the gold medals at the Olympics. In 2021, we realized that the country was not doing very well at the Olympic Games, something very topical today. And they came to realize that we didn't get a lot of medals. Our female athletes didn't get a lot of medals. So they decided to set up a research lab at the INSEP Institute, the National Sports Institute. The purpose of all this was to increase the number of medals, not in 2024 because this lab was set up in 2021, so it will take some time. And the purpose of this institute is to follow up all the athletes by taking into account female specificities, hormones, periods, because we know that at some time in the cycle, women are more likely to be injured. So then you need to change the way they train. And it's something that had never been taken into account before 2020. I still cannot believe it because, you know, people who work in the field have done that on a one-to-one basis for a long time. That's being done in English-speaking countries. But in France, nothing was organized officially. So there's still a lot to do in that respect. There is another question in the chat. In some studies, in some health studies, we collect gender data and people can ask and answer male, female, or other. What about people who say other? Do we have to force them to choose for male or female in this questionnaire? No, no, I would say no, especially when it comes to health. The way you ask a question in that sort of questionnaire related to health will lead to different conclusions. And if you just limit yourself between male and female, you won't have a clear picture of the way this person represents themselves. And you won't have all the information enabling you to understand some issues. So we should definitely not stick to male or female. Obviously, it all depends on the type of study you're conducting. What type of information do you need? That's the main thing. Do you need something that's related to the biology of the person, or is it related to their behavior? For example, when it comes to health, if you're working on prevention, gender is probably something that's more relevant because prevention relates to behavior and relates to the way people represent themselves, the way they act, which is not necessarily the same as something related to biology. And talking about this, I would like to point that there's a really good webinar by the John Mackins Institute. I'll forward you the links. And this webinar is related to the issue of gender in the field of health.
Oui, avec plaisir, si tu peux nous partager ce lien. Merci Elodie pour cette question très intéressante. J'ai une autre question, je me permets.
I have another question, if I may, before we close the Q&A. Have you been able to work closer or not with politicians to raise their awareness on that subject, especially on the lack of data regarding women and the importance of having those data for public policies? Well, not really. Not as obviously as that. That said, that I'm bringing the table, the subject on the table regularly to talk about it, which is, I think, the first essential step, which is not easy. And yet, when you do it, and I can see it on training, on acculturation to data, etc., where gender is not the subject, data is the subject. And I open that tiny window and people throw themselves in the window and really take part in those natural debates among themselves, including. So there are really real questions and a real will to share information and to share points of view. So I don't think politicians are as ready to tackle those subjects as the audience in general and statisticians. Thank you. Last question in the chat from Jubilee. Can you please reply the question? What is the impact that gender data have had on the improvement of public health services? Well, concrete impacts, there are so many examples. You have to first identify the problematics that are specific to women to be able to tackle them. Concretely, for a very long time, women have been considered a woman who had pain in her breast or was not feeling very well. Oh, that's okay, she'll get over it. If she doesn't feel good, she'll get over it. It's just hormonal or a period or whatever it is. But we realized that the heart attack, for example, had different symptoms for male and for women. So we thought heart attacks were only male related. But when we widened the vision or the scope and we've identified symptoms for heart attacks in women, we've realized that women were doing a lot of heart attacks, but they were not detected or even tracked because we didn't have the data or the symptoms. So knowing that is allowing you to reevaluate your medical or health approach and be able to better identify this type of diseases. During the heat waves, we've realized that women were much more impacted in terms of mortality, and we don't know why. We still don't know why. We have leads, but we have no concrete reason or factor as to why women are not affected or die more in a heat wave than men. It's not just because there are more elder women. In a similar proportion, women are more affected and overrepresented represented in the mortality or heat waves. So the importance of gender data is to realize the situation, understand or realize that there is a difference in the situation of men and women. And then you can, once you have the data, then you can start acting on it. Thank you very much, Maëlle, for this new answer. Unfortunately, we have to stop the Q&A now so that we can give the floor to our next speakers. Thank you very much, says Maëlle. Thank you very much, says Leo. The very important thing is that everybody can talk about gender data, put them on the table, and we can do that on the table. And not just women, actually. Men can also work on gender data. Thank you so much, Maëlle, once again. I will now give the floor to the next speaker, the first and only man of that webinar, Craig Taylor. I'm going to give you the floor for your presentation, and you will see that there is that it can be very close to art. Craig, you have the floor.
Thanks very much. Okay, let me just share my presentation. Okay, I hope you can all see that. I can't see anyone's faces, so I'm just going to assume that there is things on the screen.
Ça fonctionne.
Cool. So, hello, everybody.
It's working.
I'm Craig Taylor, and I head up the data visualization team at Ito World. Fantastic to be here today. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I get to speak about all things animated mapping, which is a big passion of mine. So, I'll just let this play in the background and I'll explain a little bit about what I do at Ito World. So one of the aspects of my work at Ito World, the company I work for, is the production of these cinematic visualizations that depict clients' data in new and interesting ways. We work with all sorts of clients, from local councils, the likes of TomTom or Facebook. And the idea in the creation of these visualizations is that we try to tick 3 boxes: engagement, insight, and narrative. So we like to think of ourselves as fundamentally interpreters of data, right? So we like to create these animations which are, hopefully visually striking, enough so to grab audiences' attention and encourage them to engage with the visualization. We also understand the importance of insight. And through the use of our bespoke software, we're able to ingest huge volumes of data, which I'll talk a little bit about in a bit, and derive insight over a large temporal scale. But most importantly, we like to think ourselves as storytellers. Each visualizations that we produce is a user-guided experience through a data set that you may or may not be familiar with, and hope that by the end of that visualization, you have a clearer understanding of what we're trying to show you. So I thought this would be a good topic for this presentation because it's something that I've been doing quite often this year, and that's Transit Viz Thursday. So earlier this year, I decided to post on a fairly regular basis some of the work I do at Ito World, all revolving around transit data visualizations. And the idea was to post these on a Thursday, hence Transit Viz Thursdays. So the idea was born so I could kind of keep up this cadence of creating animated visualizations, exploring new techniques, reviving old projects, just basically keeping up to date with basically anything transit orientated in terms of data. And I also wanted to spark conversations about the techniques and data that I'm using. So let's talk about some of these projects. So first project that I want to talk about is Los Angeles bus speed. So I work with big data, and by big, I mean millions and millions and millions of GPS points over a huge temporal scale. I've done a lot of work in LA looking at transit data, especially during COVID. So I wanted to create a visualization that showcased what speed could tell us about infrastructure. So the visualization behind us is showing 15 million recorded data points over 6 months, and the points are expressed as speed. So speed is recorded along the height axis, the z-axis. So the higher the point, the faster the vehicle that was recorded at that position is traveling, and we're using density as a proxy for, and we're using color as a proxy for density here. So the darker the points, the closer together they are. So you can start seeing where bus stops are, and it's really useful for us internally to sense check where bus stops are. And usually when we get data, bus stops can be in different places, for instance. And so by analyzing data of this scale and looking at the patterns in speed, for instance, we can start seeing where them buses are slowing via the sort of arcs that the speed profiles produce, and then we can start predicting where bus stops might be or whether they need to be moved. So the next visualization is one of my favorite visualizations I've produced, and it's such a silly concept. It's the loneliest bus in BODS, and BODS is it's an online database that we created for Department of Transport that houses a huge volume of bus data. And what I wanted to do was look through all that data and find out what the most lonely bus was. And by lonely, I mean the bus that interacted with the fewest buses along its route. So it was quite an interesting methodology of how I did it. I'll just touch on briefly the process of creating that. So we looked at lots of data. So we took a 3-hour window from like 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock and looked at data at 5-second intervals. So this is resulting in millions and millions of points anyway. So we can't analyze too much data. And then each route along that bus route, each one of these individual routes was isolated. And at each point along that route, we calculated what the closest bus to it was. So doing that over thousands and thousands of routes, we were able to index each route and figure out what the route that had least interaction with other buses was. And it was, well, the bus that I just showed. So yeah, some useless data viz, but also quite interesting at the same time. Occupancy data is a really interesting facet of public transport data, and it's quite powerful in terms of being able to understand the mobility of a city and how a network works. And so this visualization uses sort of clustering analysis to figure out where people are getting off or getting on a bus. And so you can see the orbs moving around those black spheres, they're buses, and as they sort of stop at bus stops, they deposit or they pick up people, and the spheres that are deposited on the floor represent the number of people getting off the bus. So as them spheres, sort of clustering zones move outwards, you can see how the pattern of occupancy over the course of a day exists in a city. So it's good for city planners to be able to analyze what areas of the city are underserved, or if there's a new school going in anywhere, maybe we need more bus routes, or are people getting off a bus route and then walking further than what they should do. So lots of interesting things around occupancy data. Transit mountains was another concept I came up with, which was all to do with experimenting with simulation models and real world physics in terms of being able to use that to tell a story with data. So what you're seeing here is similar to the last visualization. It's showing where people are getting off a bus, but it's using a fictional terrain and that build up over the course of a day to show exactly where those patterns lie. And it's quite an interesting method of how that works. And I'll just go to the next slide, which breaks the concept down a little bit. And what we do is we sort of rain the data down from the sky as these spheres, and each sphere has got a stickiness to it. So the positioning of the data in the sky is where they are on the ground, but when they fall, they form these mountains, and they sort of amalgamate to form transit mountains, which is just an interesting way of looking, a different way of looking at sort of regional variance in this kind of data. But it's not all about insight and things like that. I think my work outside of Ito World is mostly about experimenting with data, the alchemy of letting loose on a data set, manipulating it, and trying to find interesting signals using 3D visualization. And that's fascinating to me. The above example shows lots of different ways of showing these concepts. We're using neon pings in the top left there to show sort of occupancy data again, or where people are getting off and on a bus. The explosions that you're seeing in the top right, that's bus volume. So that's showing the volume of data within our BOD system. And when you sort of, apply some physics to it, they can make fascinating shapes. The gazers, the bottom left, bottom right example, again, that's showing how people are sort of navigating around a city. So lots of fun in just experimenting with visualizations and sort of, again, letting loose. And that, I guess, leads me on to data art and the sort of power of being able to experiment. And Coral Cities, which is one of my favorite projects that I've ever worked on, was born of just experimenting with road data. I took lots of different network data and sort of manipulated those routes to create these sort of coral formations. And I've been fascinated by the concept of making these city networks look like living corals. And the sort of varying patterns of urban forms are inherently dictated by the road network, and you can see that in some of the formations that are in these coral cities. Like branches of coral, they have a pattern and a function. I chose to express this pattern and manipulate it to become something far more conceptual, but it's all rooted in real spatial data. So it kind of has a meaning to it, which I find is sort of fascinating and really fun to play with. And then I'm always coming back to this project to experiment with different techniques and sort of as I learn new techniques and different softwares, I'm able to do fancier things with it. And this is an example of sort of routing particles down one of those branches as well to create these kind of fascinating visualizations, I guess. I've gone quicker than what I thought I was going to do. I was meant to slow down for the interpreters, but yeah, that's it. So happy to answer any questions.
Merci Craig.
Thank you very much, Craig. So flabbergasted when you present this type of visualization is really amazing, and there are amazing comments also in the chat. There's a question from Adrien. Can you please reply?
Yes. Can you please drop us the stack you use, including the database stack and programming languages? Yeah, so I get asked a lot about how these things are made. There's no programming language to it. It's all done via node workflows in a program called Houdini. But Blender is very similar in its approach to visualization. It's like a VFX package for movie studios use it as for VFX, but you can also use it for data because it's just everything's got points, lines and polygons. But it's all underpinned by GIS systems, QGIS, or any of the Esri softwares. Most of the analysis is done in them softwares before it goes into a sort of 3D workflow. But yeah, that's generally the sort of route that I take. Sorry, I'm just looking at the questions. Do you mind asking what you use for this? Yeah, so again, what was the process for building something like this, both mentally and code-wise? So the kind of the process for building one of these visualizations is, well, it varies really. It's a lot of those concepts were born from looking around different sources of inspiration to see like the physical stuff. I'll drop it in the chat. The visualization on the plastic waste. I always found fascinating and how it piled up in a city. There was that incredible. I think it was one of the Information is Beautiful submissions. But I always wanted to figure out how you do that from a physical point of view. Like how do you stack up data or spheres in a software, and how do you create them formations? And so that led me down the route of looking at simulation models and gravity and rigid body dynamics and all the things that come with these crazy simulation suites. And I guess that led to that. So my process is a bit backwards in that I look for a technique that I want to apply to the data, and then I try and retrofit it into the data, which isn't the best way of doing things, but that's kind of how my brain works sometimes. How much time does it take to make these kind of visualizations? It can vary, really. I mean, the workflows themselves can. It depends on how much data I'm analyzing and the complexity of I guess, the spatial analysis that I'm doing on it. But the thing that takes most time is the rendering, because these aren't interactive renderers. It's offline rendering that can take ages, thousands and thousands of frames. So yeah, that's not fun, just sitting in front of my machine while it whirs. But the benefit is that I don't have to put any heating on because it just heats my room for me. Blender open source software. There's a French question there. Let me just stick it in I just need to translate it.
Which question is it, Craig? I can interpret
Sorry.
it for you.
Is it the one from Adrian?
Maybe it was a question from Mel. Oh, the question from Adrian is
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, it was a reply. Okay.
Yeah, it was for Mel. But there are new questions.
Okay. Do you act as a consultant? I mean, if there's an API, is it possible to create a project with you? Yes. I work with lots of different people. So if there is, if you have data and you want it visualized in a way that I've just showed you, yeah, please get in touch. Can GPS be used to get coordinates and points for plotting these kinds of visualizations? Yes. I've done a lot with GPS. I've done a lot with manual. One of the projects I was going to show, actually, that I'm annoyed I didn't, was a project called Plot My Paws, which was, I'm always fascinated with collecting my own data. And I had a puppy, little spaniel puppy, a few years ago, and I attached a GPS tracker onto him because we have this conservation area that he runs around and goes crazy, and so I wanted to create a visualization of all his routes as he ran around this conservation area, which was fascinating. And the project got bigger, and I involved lots of people from my village in it. And yes, I took all them GPS points and made lots of visualizations out of it. So that was fun. GPS is great, and collecting your own data is inherently fascinating. Who's the target audience usually for these type of data viz? Do you target users that have additional training to understand their data story? Yeah, so I guess from a corporate point of view, a lot of the time we have data providers like TomTom, for instance, that want to tell a story or want to sell their data and show exactly how it can be visualized and the stories that you can tell from that data. So we have sort of data providers, and that feeds into a sort of marketing arm of visualization, which is obviously quite powerful in terms of getting people to look at the data story. But then we also have people who like transport modelers that we've worked with that aren't able to visualize such a huge data set over such a long period of time, and in which case they come to us as more of a like a sort of client that helps them visualize their data and and let them tell them what their models are producing. And that feedback cycle can help them iterate and refine their models. So it's kind of like a, I guess, like, yeah, consultancy-led project where we help them understand their data. And often we have clients that come to us and they have data and they don't know that it's got a story in it, or they don't know what the data's telling. So there's a lot of, we call it our data discovery phase, where we get the data, we ingest it, and we just see what stories are being told from it. So lots of different users, lots of different needs, and of course the sort of, I guess, the stuff that I do in my own time is purely for my fun, and I guess the data visualization audience on social medias.
Merci Craig pour ces différentes réponses.
Thank
Merci.
you, Craig, for your answers. Thank you, everyone, for all those questions. Fiona, Adrien, Arsène, etc. I think that's really great that we can all interact. Craig, I think everybody would be interested to know where we can have a look at those data viz. Are they publicly available, or do you have a TikTok or other account, social media account that you can share with us so we can follow up a bit your creations?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I'll share some links in the chat.
Super, merci Craig. Donc encore une fois, c'était
Thank you so much, Craig. Fantastic.
très
It was
beau.
really interesting to see all of that. Visually, it's really impressive and really impactful and very beautiful. Thank you so much for presenting all of that, Craig. Without much further ado, we'll give the floor to Kat. You can share your screen. Kat is going to tell us why we need to visualize our data.
All right, thank you for the introduction. Hopefully everyone can see my screen okay. I'd just like to say that my thoughts are with everyone in New Caledonia at the moment. I think you've had a very intense few weeks, and I hope you're all okay. So I'll start today with a bit of background. I work in quite a niche data viz space. I work as a data storyteller. So this basically means that I use a story structure to communicate the meaning of data. And here are a few examples of my work. I like to experiment with different ways to tell or illustrate data stories. In these examples, there's a mix of different tools that I've used. The people are AI generated images created using Midjourney. My tool of choice, though, is anything Adobe. So Illustrator, Photoshop, After Effects. I feel these apps enable my design to be a little bit freer than if I was to use, say, more traditional BI tools, which I think come with a few more constraints. But I do train a lot of people who use Tableau or Power BI to visualize their data. So today, what I thought I'd do is give you a quick introduction to the different reasons to visualize data and how understanding your reason can help you in this particular challenge. First of all, let's start with some definitions. These two terms are often confused: data storytelling versus data visualization. So data storytelling communicates a data-derived message, and this may or may not be visual. So not all data stories are told using visuals. And data visualization presents data visually, and this may or may not tell a story. And so not all data visuals need to tell a story. So for the purpose of this talk, I thought I'd just focus on the visualization side of things. Data viz has gained a lot of popularity in the last decade. Don't get me wrong, it's been around for a lot longer than that, but around about 10 years ago, there was another wave of data visuals. Analytics software began to incorporate more visual ways of displaying data. The practice of data viz, much like data science, has expanded and specialized. It's no longer as simple as it once was to just create a graph, because today, not all graphs are created equally. So to understand why you can't create the same graph for everything, you need to understand the reasons to visualize data in the first place. And in business, there are 3 reasons to create a data visual. So to discover, to inform, or to educate. And if you understand your reason to visualize data, you can then design something that is a little bit more fit for purpose. And I'll zoom into each of these reasons and just explain them a little bit more. Starting with discover. You may have heard the saying, curiosity killed the cat, but did you know the second part of that saying, that satisfaction brought it back? As naturally curious people, you may know what it feels like to be in flow when doing analysis. When you feel totally immersed in the process, your curiosity takes over and you're creating graph after graph after graph as fast as you're thinking about them. During this process, you're visualizing data to discover or to find data insight. These visuals are messy, they are unordered, they're usually rainbow colored and have no metadata associated with them whatsoever. I'm here to tell you that this kind of data viz, this chart vomit, as it has been termed, it's okay to make. It's okay to make because for this type of data visualization, you're the only one that is going to see it. If you're creating data visuals to discover insights, you are the audience. You can design them to your own liking. There are absolutely no rules. Discover visuals are the only type you create just for you. Discover visuals are part of the analytics process. The other 2 types, inform and educate, are forms of data communication because they're created for someone other than yourself. So let's look at these. A common reason to create a visual when communicating data is to inform. And now this might sound really obvious, but for these visuals, this is their sole purpose. So often our data is kept in the dark. This darkness can be caused by data noise when you've got important data metrics surrounded by less important metrics. And this darkness can also be caused by systems. Maybe your data is kept in complex systems that somebody can't access. If you're creating a data visual to inform, you're essentially trying to make it as easy as possible for your data to see the light. In other words, inform graphs are designed to make data easy to access. Maybe you've done the analysis and now you want to present only the metrics that matter. A dashboard is an example of a visualization created for this reason, where specific metrics are displayed in a very ordered way, making it easy for someone to see the latest measurement. This type of visual is a form of data communication because you're designing it for someone else. Now, something that trips a lot of people up when designing data communications is overestimating an audience's knowledge. Now, this is when you think they know more than they actually do about the data or the topic. The audience for inform visuals need to be able to understand the data without context. So if the audience you're designing for are subject experts, an inform visual maybe as part of a dashboard is all they need. But if your audience doesn't know much about the data that you want to communicate and you need to upskill them, then you're looking at the last reason, designing to educate. For those working in knowledge management, you've most likely heard of the 4 stages of data. The idea that it goes from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. Now, wisdom, the desired end state, is just applied knowledge. So in terms of communicating your data, what you hope to achieve here is for your audience to increase their knowledge. In order to do this, they'll need to understand why the data you're showing them is important. You'll need to provide context. Is that number high or low for that metric? Why is that important? What does it mean for them? Visualizing data to educate involves data storytelling. And this can take many forms. So examples of data storytelling include insight reports, explanatory infographics, presentations. When you design a visual to educate, you need to be clear on what your message is. What do you as the designer want your audience to understand? So if you're entering this challenge and creating a data visual, ask yourself, am I doing this to discover, to inform, or to educate? Maybe you have to visualize your data for more than one reason, and this is okay. It's okay to visualize the same data differently. For example, you might have to create a bunch of discovery visuals that help you understand the data set that you're looking at. But what you don't want to do is give these to someone else. So you'll need to think about how you communicate what you've found in that data. So who is your audience? Are they subject experts, or are they also seeking knowledge? If you're interested in anything that I talked about, it is all covered in chapter 1 of the Data Storyteller's Handbook. This is a free chapter you can download from my website, roguepenguin.co.nz, if you're just after a few more details. Thank you very much. I'll leave it there, and any questions?
Merci Kat pour cette présentation.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Kat is indeed the author of this handbook that she's just introduced, where you'll find a huge amount of tips to create a good data viz. There's a first question has been asked of you in the chat. Kat, I'll let you answer.
Oh, yes. How do you know if your audience needs an inform or educate visual? Yeah, and this can be a really hard one if you don't understand your audience well. So there are techniques that you can use to try and get into the headspace of your audience, but I think it is about just having an idea. Sometimes if you're working in a work environment and your audience is someone you work with, you'll have a good idea of what they know about the information that you're trying to communicate. But in other situations, you might not have any idea of their understanding level of knowledge around this topic. And so it will be a bit of a guessing game in some situations. I think you'll get an idea when you start communicating with someone often, sharing data, because they'll say, you'll give them data and their reply might be, well, so what? And that's a clear sign that you need to provide a little bit more explanation and how you communicate that information. So if you just give someone, say, an informed visual where you're just about presenting the numbers and their reply is, so what? It means that they're asking for that context, they're asking for that meaning and explanation to be included in the way that you communicate. So I think always err on the side of maybe they don't know as much as you think that they do, and then start to provide a little bit more context. If they don't need that context, they will generally tell you that they don't need it, but always assume that maybe they don't know as much as you think that they do. Another question. Who is the target audience for the challenge? I know that we'll be judged by subject experts, but are they who we're making the data viz for? Oh, this is a great question. And one I don't feel like maybe that I should put the
Je vais
line
peut-être
in
y
the sand.
répondre, Kat, sur cette question. Si tu le veux.
Maybe I'll answer, Kat, if you don't mind. It's a really good question from Cheyenne. Yes, you are going to create a data viz for the 4 judges, for all the judges, including the 4 experts on the call today. But this data viz has to be used eventually, has to be useful eventually. That's the purpose of all this. And the purpose of this data viz is to inform and educate a maximum number of people. So we are not targeting an expert audience. Obviously, the judges have the necessary qualification to rate your data viz, but this is aimed at a very large audience, young people, older people. The purpose of your data viz is to convey a very simple message. And if the data viz is really good and we can share it in the media, we'll do it. So I'm asking you to visualize the data you have to make that data accessible and clear and visible in one go. Any more questions? I hope my answer was clear enough.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions sinon pour Kat
Any
concernant...
more questions to Kat following her presentation? Do not hesitate to ask questions in the chat. Kat will be able to answer the questions later. I want to tell Maël and Craig that we are perfectly aware that it's very late where you are. So if you're very tired, you don't have to stay on the call. Obviously, the others have to stay on, but Craig and Maël can very well go to bed if they wish to do so. Thank you very much, Kat. So do not hesitate to ask questions to Kat in the chat. She'll be able to answer at the end of this call. And in the meantime, we'll give the floor to Ali, who is the last presenter. Thanks again to Kat. Do not hesitate to buy her book to have more information, more very useful information about data viz. Ali, you have the floor and you'll be the last presenter in this webinar. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Leo. I'm so happy to be here. Today, I'm going to share with you an exercise to instantly see your data viz through a new lens. So maybe you feel a little bit stuck with boring charts or charts that you feel like aren't going to win you this specific data viz challenge. Maybe you don't have the magic skills like Craig does in Houdini, so you feel like, my graphics just aren't so creative. What can I do? Well, today I'm going to help you see through a new lens to make more creative data visualizations. I'm Ali Torbin. I started my career as a data analyst in the DC area, and then I became a mom and I started trying to figure out what my calling was. And I discovered data visualization. And this was my first chart. You can see how much I did not know about data visualization. This is probably one of the bad charts that Selena was mentioning at the very beginning. I am guilty of creating charts like this. And I realized how little I knew about data viz. So I started a podcast so I could interview other data visualization designers and discover what their secrets were. And so I have improved over time and I've won an award from the Data Visualization Society. And today I create a wide range of graphics from traditional data visualizations to infographics and even data comics. And so I have bottled up all the things I've learned about creating creative infographics and data visualization in my new book, ChartSpark, and it has exercises in it that help you coax out your own creativity when you are communicating with data. So I want to share one of those exercises with you today that you can use when you are working on your submission for the challenge. Okay, so let's see our boring data viz through a new lens by doing an exercise. But first, I want to define creative. What does creative even mean? We have such a high standard for creativity. We think, we need to do amazing things like Craig with this Houdini, just mind-blowing work, or Einstein level creativity. It doesn't need to be such a high bar. So the definition of creativity by Fisher and Williams in a book called Unlocking Creativity, they define it as generating many variations of an idea or remixing existing ideas. And then you assess it. Is this idea original to me, my community, or all humans? And it can be any one of those. And then thinking about, is this idea meaningful and ethical? And this last part is really important. Is the idea meaningful? Is it useful to someone else? Leo was just talking about that. We want our graphics to be useful to someone else. Otherwise, what's the point? So the exercise that I want to show you is called the CTR exercise. It's an acronym, and it's an exercise that helps you see your data viz through a new lens by helping you find a more meaningful angle in your data. You want your data visualization to be as meaningful as possible to your reader. So how do you do that? Well, I want to ask a series of questions, but first, why do we want our data to be meaningful? Well, it's because data is meaningless on its own. We as humans decide what's meaningful or not. Not spreadsheets, not the computers. We decide what's meaningful. And in interviewing a lot of data journalists on my podcasts, they taught me that you need to do three things. You need to avoid the obvious when you're communicating data to other humans, focus on timeliness, and then also share a way that someone can learn more or go further. So thinking about these things, I crafted this exercise where it asks questions to coax these things out so you can find a really meaningful angle in your data. So here's what you're going to do. The first thing you're going to do, I'll share all these questions and then I'll share an example. So the first thing is you take your data, or maybe you're already starting with a exploratory viz, like Kat was saying, and you make an observation. What have you noticed in this data set? Maybe there's an outlier or a pattern or a trend that's standing out to you. And it's okay if it's kind of obvious at first. Then think about the conflict. If this observation is true, then what's the consequence? And who's affected? And then think about the timeliness. Why is this important now? Or what can I compare it to that is important now? And then finally, resolution. What can help? What actions can we take? Where do we go for more information? And as you write these things out, it'll help you brainstorm a better angle for your data to make sure you're hitting these things and it ends up being as meaningful as possible to your reader. So here's an example. Back in 2017, Makeover Monday, which is a community project where they share a data set and everyone tries to visualize it as practice. They released this data set on the prices of avocados from 2015 to 2017, and it was broken up by conventional avocados and the prices of organic avocados. So I visualized this data in kind of the chart type that probably everybody would use to show change over time, a line chart. And I was going to share it, but then I thought, this is so boring. Like people are going to forget this chart as soon as they see it. So what's even the point? So I ran through this exercise, the CTR exercise. So first observation, organic avocados are more expensive. Okay, everybody knows that. That's obvious. What's the conflict? Well, if organic avocados are more expensive, then some people might not be able to afford organic avocados, or they'll opt for the conventional ones to save money. Why is this important now? Well, there might be a time where organic prices come close to the conventional prices, which would be a great opportunity to eat organic avocados if you can't normally afford them. What's the resolution? What actions can we take? Well, in this chart, I found that March 2017, the prices of organic and conventional actually came really close together. It was only a 24-cent difference. So assuming it were March or April 2017 right now, I could show that this is the time to grab those organic avocados and make your guacamole. So I tweaked the chart a little bit. We have a different title now and a different chart type. So the title says, make that guac now, organic avocados only 24 cents more expensive. And because I'm trying to highlight the difference between the types of avocados, I chose a dumbbell chart rather than a line chart. So your eyes are drawn to the space in between the points. And I also highlighted the March 2017 and showed the prices here. So you can see them compared to each other. You know, this chart isn't winning any awards or anything, but I just made some small tweaks, and this chart is way more interesting and useful. It's useful to our reader. And in making it more useful, I made it more unique and therefore more creative. So you can use the CTR exercise when you need to turn your boring chart into something, see it through a new lens, and turn it into something more meaningful for your reader. And so I just want you to remember that you are so creative. And if you would like more exercises to help coax out your creativity, you can check out my book, Chart Spark, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Ali, pour cette super présentation et cet exemple.
Thank you, Ali, for this great presentation and the example of guacamole. Now we are very hungry. I'm going to give the floor to the various participants if they have questions. Thank you very much for your energy. And if you see questions in the chat, I'll let you answer them directly.
Yes, I see one. Thanks for the presentation. What's something we can do today to start thinking more creatively? Oh, great question. Okay. Well, one thing is being open to the ideas that you're already having. So a lot of people think, oh, I'm not creative, or I need to wait around for a strike of lightning. And you might not realize that you are actually having more ideas than you think you are. You're probably just dismissing it way faster than than you should. So writing down your ideas and waiting maybe a day or two to assess them, that can be really useful to think more creatively. And also to collect your inspiration in a really strategic way. So I have another prompt in the book where when you see a graphic that you really like, rather than just bookmarking it, then you can actually X-ray it. So X-ray is an acronym, X-R-A-Y. I'll type it in the chat. So X stands for excited. Think about, why did this graphic initially get me excited? R is for rules. What data visualization rules is this graphic following? A is for anarchy. How is it throwing out the rules? Like the cool 3D visualizations that Craig was showing. Some people might say, never do 3D, but you can see it works sometimes. And then Y, U, how might you use these techniques that you found in the graphic in your own work? So rather than just looking at a visualization and saying, oh, that's nice, X-ray it, and that will help make sure that you can use those techniques in your work when you need them. So I hope that helps. Someone said, what is the biggest challenge you face when creating data visualization, and how do you overcome it? I honestly think it's the finding an interesting angle. You know, I think a couple of the other presenters mentioned this. You need to make sure that your graphic or your the point of your graphic is meaningful to the people reading it. Otherwise, you know, it's just going to be forgettable. And being really clear on the message you want to convey before you even start visualizing something for your explanatory viz, that's super, super important. And people like to rush through it and do the fun part of visualizing it and, you know, finalizing it and publishing it. That's definitely the more fun part. But thinking about, all right, what's the problem? What's the goal of the graphic? What's the interesting part that I'm trying to convey? Am I doing a good job with the chart type and my color and my annotations in bringing out the main point I'm trying to convey? All those things might not feel as fun, but it's a challenge and it's worth doing. Let's see, we have another. Fiona, what's the process you use to design these databases? Start with your basic visual and then try out other visuals. I noticed you changed the title header of the visual as well. Any recommendations for that? Yeah, so I would say the first thing I do when I'm starting a visualization is I'm usually visualizing for a client, and I have this whole questionnaire of questions that I ask them, which you can actually download for free. I have just type it in the chat. It's like 4-page questionnaire. So you can use it for yourself, or you can use it for your client when you're asking them a bunch of questions. And it just really helps you get clear to make sure you know what the goal is, who the audience is, all that really, really important information. And then I do exploratory analysis like Kat was talking about, seeing what the shape of my data is, what the limitations are. And then I'm trying to figure out different chart types. I'm experimenting with different chart types to see what brings out that message the best. And then I typically use Tableau when I am making graphics, and then I export it as a PDF, and you can bring that into Illustrator and turn it into an SVG, and then I bring it into Figma, because right now I like Figma a lot more than Adobe Illustrator. And then I can clean it up, like make the annotations a little bit nicer, maybe change the colors, and maybe add any hand-drawn elements that I want to do, and then test it. That's kind of probably my last step, is to test it on other people, because I want to make sure that what I'm trying to convey is actually what people are getting, which, can be difficult at times. So definitely test your visualizations.
Merci Ali pour toutes ces réponses. J'encourage
Thanks,
vivement
Ali, for these answers. I would encourage all future participants in the challenge to use this process, the CTR process. This will help you. And please take into account the advice given by Kat earlier in the previous presentation. This will be very useful for you to create your own data viz. So I would strongly encourage you to use all this. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time. Well, we'll have one last question, Fiona's question, and then we'll move on to the conclusion of this webinar by WeSee. But first of all, Fiona's question.
Yes. Do you have any color combinations that you prefer or have worked best, or does it depend on the theme? Yeah, it definitely depends on the theme. Sorry. And the art direction for the client. I mean, for this project, I might start with maybe the color palette of the challenge. That might be a good brand color scheme to jump off of. But in general, rather than thinking about what colors should I use, I think about how. How is color going to highlight my main message? So use that as your guiding principle, and it will help you make sure you're not going to turn it into a rainbow mess, and just stay focused with your color.
Merci Ali. Merci beaucoup en tout
Thanks,
cas.
Ali. Thanks to everyone for your questions. Without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to WeSee, who's going to close the webinar. For those of you who have to leave in 5 minutes, you're allowed to leave, of course, but we're going to give the floor to WeSee. Can everybody hear me? Great. Hi, morning, everyone. And my name is WeSee. I am a data officer for the government of New Caledonia. We've organized this specific challenge since 2022 with the SPC. To close this webinar, I would like to thank Selina, who's in Australia, or was in Australia, because she's very busy. She had to leave us, but it was very good of us for her to give a presentation from Brisbane just before taking a plane. So she reminded us that you need to take pen and paper, bring people together when you work on a data viz. She told us how to use the proper visual options depending on the audience and the type of message you want to convey. Thank you then to Maëlle from France, who stayed up very late to give us a presentation that's absolutely fascinating and directly related to our theme this year, gender inequality. Thanks to for explaining the use of gender data to take stock of the situation, to improve public policies and make sure that these data can have an impact on our daily life and make the world better. When you think data, you think of figures, graphs, tables, maps, but you never imagine that data can be turned into art. But what else can you say about the works of art produced by Craig with geographic data, GPS and transit data? Thank you very much, Craig, for sharing these unbelievably beautiful presentations with us. I myself love art, and your productions, your creations, I find them extremely inspiring. When you look at Craig's portfolio, you see that even with data related to very serious issues, you can produce something absolutely beautiful and wonderful. Thanks, Craig, for staying with us, whereas it's extremely late in the UK at the moment, and I know that you only sleep you don't sleep very much at night since you've become a dad. It was also a great pleasure to meet Kat from New Zealand. Thank you very much, Kat, for telling us what sort of questions we should ask when you create a data viz, because there are many ways of visualizing the same data, but you have to be very clear what you want to communicate, what type of audience you're talking to, and how you want to convey that message. And finally, we had Ali from Washington, D.C. in the United States. She told us about the questions you absolutely need to ask in order to avoid creating a boring chart, a boring database, because your audience will not like it. I loved your example, Ali, because I love avocado and guacamole. Thank you very much for all these 5 amazing presenters. It was a great honor for us to be able to listen to your presentations. It's also an honor for us to have you as members of our jury for this Pacific Data Challenge. Now talking to people on the call, I hope this webinar was useful for you. If you have additional questions about the challenge itself or questions to the presenters, use the form that you'll find on the Pacific Data Viz Challenge. Will answer your questions. And please feel free to ask any type of question you like. This webinar will also be available on our YouTube channel, and where you'll find the recording of the launching conference. Thank you very much, and our hearts go out to representatives or people from New Caledonia, because time is very difficult for them. So I just want to say good luck to all of those who want to take part in the Pacific Data Viz Challenge, and I'll just hand the floor to Leo. Yes, thank you very much, and great. It was great. You managed to summarize everything very well. I can say that I'm very proud of having organized this webinar with you, and I learned so much. I would also like to thank the interpreters who were able to interpret English and French speakers and during these presentations. And thank you to all those people who were on the call. 80 people were on this call. Thanks for your questions. and for your attention. And I would like to encourage you to use all the good advice that you've received during this challenge, during this seminar. And one last thing to end this webinar. I'd like you to use Slido to say goodbye in your own language. So I'm from Brittany in France, to the west of France, metropolitan France. And so I'll use the word we used to say goodbye in Brittany. So what I would like you to say, rather than goodbye, is see you later. So see you later or goodbye in your language. Kenavo, that's the way we use in Brittany, Oleti, Nisa Mode, Mode Manda. So thanks everyone for taking part in this webinar. I hope you can see my screen. Tata bisou, that's a typical way of saying goodbye in New Caledonia, and our hearts go out to everybody in New Caledonia. Thanks everybody, and good luck for the Pacific Data Viz Challenge 2024. And we are looking forward to your submissions. Thanks everybody, Tata bisou, and we hope you liked the webinar. We'll send you a questionnaire. Thank you. Thank you to all the presenters, and see you next year.